When Sandra leaned close, Keanu said something nobody believed. The hall was crowded. Cameras flashed from every corner and voices filled the air like restless waves. Reporters pushed forward. Fans held out their phones, and lights were so bright that every small expression looked larger than life. In that noise, in that sea of restless energy, something happened that no one expected. Sandra Bullock leaned close to Keanu Reeves, her face serious, her eyes searching for something in his calm presence. People saw it, people whispered about it, but no one could guess what was about to be said. Keanu Reeves had always been known as the quiet one. He stood with a kind of stillness that made others uneasy but also curious. When Sandra leaned close, some thought she was whispering about the event, maybe about the crowd, maybe about something simple like the schedule. But then Keanu's lips moved, and what came out was not what anyone believed would be spoken in that moment. It was soft, but sharp, and those who were close enough to hear froze in place. At first, no one could even process it. A man built on silence, humility, and endless patience had suddenly chosen words that were both strange and powerful. The words carried weight, like they had been waiting for years to escape. Sandra blinked in shock, her hand pausing halfway between a gesture and a grip. Her face turned pale, but also touched by something deeper. She leaned even closer, as if needing to hear them again. The crowd noticed the shift. Cameras zoomed in, flashes grew faster, and the room changed. People felt tension without knowing why. Was this an argument? Was this a confession? Or was it something much bigger? Nobody could decide, but the silence in the center of the chaos was louder than the shouts around it. Keanu's voice, so quiet that it barely reached the microphones, carried an honesty that made even strangers feel like they were standing too close to a private moment. Those around began whispering. "Did you hear it?" One reporter asked another. "No. What did he say?" The replies carried confusion, half-truths, guesses, and wild stories. Each guess sounded more unbelievable than the last, but none of them matched the truth. Because the truth was not about glamour, not about fame, not about gossip. It was something human, something raw. Sandra's reaction gave away more than she intended. Her shoulders trembled, her eyes glistened, and she touched her chest like the words had reached somewhere far inside her. People who admired her had seen her act 1,000 emotions on screen, but this was not acting. This was not a scene. It was real. Keanu's words had pulled out a response she could not hide, no matter how hard she tried. Keanu himself stood calm. His posture didn't change, his eyes didn't wander, but anyone who looked carefully saw something else. His jaw was tight, his breath was slow, and his fingers curled into the fabric of his suit jacket. The man who carried peace-like armor was showing cracks. Not weakness, but the weight of holding too much for too long. The whispers in the crowd turned into questions. People were curious, restless, impatient. What had been said? Why did Sandra look like that? Why did Keanu's voice sound like it came from a place of deep pain? The moment stretched like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. But then came the unexpected twist. Instead of explaining, instead of laughing it off, Sandra turned toward the crowd. Her eyes were red, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but then she stopped herself. She looked at Keanu, her expression torn between fear and respect. The crowd thought she might reveal the words, but she didn't. She chose silence. And that silence made the mystery even stronger. Later, when they walked together, the questions grew louder. Journalists ran headlines with guesses, fans filled forums with theories, and everywhere the same argument burned. What did Keanu say? But hidden behind all the noise was the truth that the words were not meant for the world. They were meant for Sandra, and yet their impact had already spread far beyond the two of them. Because those words carried a lesson. They carried respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. They carried a story of struggle and strength that no one expected to hear at such a glamorous moment. The hall full of lights and cameras had turned into a place of human truth, and that truth could not be unseen. But here is the real mystery that kept everyone awake that night. If the words were not meant for the world, then why did Keanu speak them where the world could hear? Was it a slip? Or was it his way of sharing something bigger than himself? As Sandra leaned closer once more before they left the stage, her hand brushed against his. The crowd thought they saw a secret, a hidden signal, maybe even a sign of romance. But the truth was deeper than that. It was about two people standing in the storm of fame, holding on to something fragile, something pure, while the world demanded to know everything. And just when the tension felt unbearable, Keanu did something again. He smiled. Not a big smile, not a staged smile, but a small, almost invisible one. It was the kind of smile that told Sandra she was not alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was what he wanted her to believe all along. This was only the beginning. The silence after the words, the night after the event, felt heavy. The city lights outside the hotel windows glowed against the glass. But inside Sandra's room, the atmosphere was different. She sat on the couch, shoes off, her dress still glittering faintly under the dim lamp. Her eyes stared at the floor, replaying every second of what Keanu had whispered. She could still hear it, soft and steady, yet shaking her inside like a storm. Keanu's words had not been loud, but they were unforgettable. They were not something people expected from a man who built his life on silence and calm. She leaned back, pressing her hands against her face. It was not the kind of whisper one could easily share. It was personal, almost too real, almost too raw. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in his own room just a few doors away. The world outside was already spinning with headlines and endless guesses. His phone buzzed with messages, calls, and requests. People wanted to know. People demanded to know. But he didn't answer. He let the phone lie silent on the table. He leaned against the chair, looking out the window at the crowded streets far below, where fans still waited, hoping for one more glimpse of him. His thoughts were not on fame, not on the noise, not even on the event. His thoughts were on Sandra. He wondered if she was hurt by what he had said, or if she understood. He wondered if the world had stolen the moment from them before it had even ended. He wondered if he had been too honest. The next morning, when they met again in the lobby, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Sandra's smile was polite but fragile, and Keanu's eyes softened as soon as he saw her. The reporters were already there, cameras ready, voices sharp like knives. Questions shot at them from every side. What did he say? Sandra, is it true what people are guessing? Keanu, was it about your past? Is this about a secret relationship? Neither of them answered. Sandra walked with calm steps. Keanu followed with steady silence. But the crowd grew restless. The lack of answers only made the storm worse. Rumors began to spread faster than truth could follow. In the car, away from flashing lights, Sandra finally turned to him. Do you realize what you've done? Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with fear. Keanu looked at her gently. I know, he said softly, but it was the truth. I couldn't hide it anymore. She pressed her hand against her chest again, the way she had the night before. Truth can hurt, and the world will twist it. Keanu nodded slowly. The world always twists things. But you heard me. That's enough. Her eyes watered, not from weakness but from the weight of carrying something she didn't ask for. She had seen him endure so much, had seen his humility tested again and again. But this was different. This was him opening a door that could not be closed. As the car drove through the crowded streets, both of them stayed quiet. The noise of the city outside was loud, but inside there was only the silence of two people who knew something. The world didn't. Later that day, a new twist shook everything. An old friend of Keanu's, someone he hadn't spoken to in years, went on a live show. They claimed they knew exactly what he had said to Sandra. Their words spread across every channel, every social media platform. The claim was dramatic, shocking, and filled with half-truths. People ate it up, repeating it as if it were fact. Sandra saw the news and froze. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone to call Keanu. When he answered, his voice was calm, but his silence carried weight. They're lying, Sandra whispered as if reassuring herself. I know, Keanu said, but lies travel faster than truth. So what do we do? She asked. Keanu paused. Then he said something that caught her completely off guard. "We let them talk. And when the time is right, we show them what real truth looks like." Sandra's breath caught. His voice carried no anger, no desperation. Only patience, only quiet resilience. But she also felt the storm rising outside, stronger than before. The world was about to push them harder, test them deeper, and she feared not for herself, but for him. That night, when the crowd outside his hotel grew into hundreds, chanting his name and demanding answers, Keanu stepped to the window. He didn't wave, he didn't smile. He only looked down at them, his expression unreadable. And then, for the first time, he turned away not with peace, but with sadness. The mystery had escaped his control, and the silence after the words was beginning to change everything. The storm that would not stop the next morning began with chaos. Newspapers carried bold headlines, television anchors debated endlessly, and social media drowned in arguments. Every corner of the internet was alive with one question: what did Keanu say to Sandra? Outside the hotel, fans waited in the heat, holding posters, phones, and questions in their eyes. Some shouted support, others shouted accusations. And in the middle of it all was a storm of curiosity that seemed impossible to calm. Inside, Sandra sat by the window holding a cup of coffee she had not touched. Her eyes scanned the endless stories on her phone, each one wilder than the last. Lies spread like wildfire, and the more she read, the more her heart sank. Keanu's words had been simple, honest, and human. But the world wanted drama. The world wanted scandal. Her phone rang again. It was her manager. "Sandra, you need to make a statement," the voice said firmly. "This silence is only making things worse. They are turning this into something it was never meant to be." Sandra closed her eyes. Her heart told her to protect Keanu, to protect the truth, but her mind reminded her of the weight of fame. And what if the truth is not what they want? She whispered. Her manager sighed. "Then they will destroy you both." Across the hallway, Keanu faced the same pressure. Calls from agents, friends, even strangers came in non-stop. Some told him to explain, some told him to deny, and some warned him of damage he could never repair. But Keanu stayed quiet, sitting in the chair by the window like a statue. He had learned long ago that the world could take everything from a man, but it could never take his choice of silence. Yet this silence was different. It was no longer his alone. It now belonged to Sandra, too. Later that afternoon, they met in the private lounge of the hotel. The room was quiet, the curtains drawn, the air heavy. Sandra looked at him with tired eyes. "Keanu, they're tearing us apart out there. I don't know how much longer we can stay silent." Keanu's gaze was steady. "Truth does not need to be shouted. It survives, even in whispers." Her voice cracked. "But what if the whispers destroy us before the truth is heard?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had carried weight, loss, and loneliness for years. Then he spoke softly. "If it destroys us, then it was never truth they wanted. It was only entertainment." Sandra felt tears rise in her eyes. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream. But she also knew he was right. Fame had never been fair. It gave, and it took away, often without reason. Just then the door burst open. It was a hotel staff member, pale and nervous. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Bullock," he stammered. "There's been an incident outside." A group of reporters broke through the barriers. "They're demanding you both come out," Sandra gasped. Keanu stood, his face calm but his shoulders tense. "Where are they now?" he asked. "They're in the main lobby," the staff member said, trembling. "Security is trying, but it's out of control." Sandra turned to Keanu, panic in her voice. "We can't go out there." Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We don't have to run. Sometimes facing the storm is the only way to survive it." His words were steady, but inside him the battle was real. He had never liked the spotlight, never liked the noise, but now he was being forced into a choice he had avoided for years. As they walked toward the lobby, the noise grew louder. Cameras flashed before they even stepped through the doorway. The crowd of reporters swarmed like bees, voices rising in a storm of demands. What did you say, Keanu? Sandra, are you hiding something? Is it true you both are? The questions cut through the air like sharp knives. Sandra froze, her breath caught in her throat. Keanu stepped in front of her, his tall frame shielding her from the chaos. For a moment, silence returned, not from the crowd, but from within him. He took a deep breath, then looked at the cameras with eyes that carried pain and strength. And then he spoke. "The words I said were not for the world," he began softly, his voice carrying just enough to reach the crowd. "They were for someone I trust. They were about honesty, about pain, about resilience. You can turn it into drama if you want, but it will never change what it truly was." The room fell still. Not completely, but enough for his voice to echo. Sandra's hand gripped the sleeve of his jacket, her eyes wide with emotion. The reporters stared, waiting for more. But Keanu said nothing else. He had given them a piece of truth, but not the whole of it. And that was enough to feed the fire, enough to keep the mystery alive, enough to make the storm grow even stronger. As they walked away, the crowd erupted again, voices rising higher than before. Sandra leaned close to him, whispering in fear. "Keanu, you just gave them more reason to chase us." He looked at her with a quiet sadness. "They were going to chase us anyway. At least now they know it came from a place of truth." But deep inside, both of them knew the storm was only beginning. The silence that followed his words was no longer safe. It was dangerous, and it was about to change their lives forever. The breaking point, the storm outside, did not fade. It grew. Every hour brought new headlines, every headline brought new pressure, and every word carried weight like stones being thrown at them. Sandra could barely walk through the hotel without flashes exploding around her. Keanu could not take a single step without being followed. The silence that had once protected them now felt like a weapon aimed back at them. Inside the quiet of her room, Sandra sat with trembling hands. She had not eaten, she had not slept, and her reflection in the mirror looked like someone she barely recognized. Her eyes were tired, her face pale, her spirit heavy. She whispered to herself, "Why does truth hurt so much when it is supposed to set us free?" The knock on her door startled her. It was Keanu. When she opened the door, his expression told her everything. He looked strong, but behind his calm eyes there was weight, sorrow, and exhaustion. "You're not okay," he said softly, stepping inside. "Neither are you," she replied, her voice breaking. They sat together in silence, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any words. Sandra finally leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his, her voice barely a whisper. "Keanu, maybe we should just tell them. Maybe we should end this." Keanu shook his head slowly. "They don't want truth, Sandra. They want noise. If we give them the truth, they'll twist it until it's something unrecognizable." She looked into his eyes. "But how long can we carry this? How long can we watch them turn our silence into their lies?" Keanu's hand rested on hers, steady and warm. "As long as it takes. Because sometimes survival is not about winning against the world. It's about protecting what matters, even when the world does not understand." Her heart ached at his words, but also felt safe in them. He was not fighting for fame or for himself. He was fighting for something deeper, something pure. But the world outside was not kind. That very night, the news broke another cruel twist. Someone from Sandra's past, an old colleague, came forward with their own version of events. They claimed Keanu's words were confessions of weakness, of failure, of hidden regret. They painted him not as a man of quiet strength, but as a man broken beyond repair. The story spread like fire. It was everywhere, on screens, on phones, in whispers among strangers. People who had once admired his calmness now questioned it. Some defended him, some mocked him, and the noise became unbearable. Sandra watched the coverage with her fists clenched. Tears burned her eyes as she turned to Keanu. "They're destroying you," but Keanu only sat still, his voice soft and steady. "They can destroy my image, but they can't touch my truth." She shook her head, angry and heartbroken. "How can you stay so calm? Don't you feel it tearing you apart?" He finally turned to her, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. "Of course I feel it. Every word cuts, every lie burns. But if I let them see me fall, then they win. And I have already lost too much in life to let this be the thing that breaks me." His words silenced her. She remembered his past, the tragedies he had endured, the losses that had shaped him into the man he was. His resilience was not built in peace, it was built in pain. And now, that same resilience was the only shield they had. Still, Sandra could not shake the fear. She leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Keanu, what if this storm never ends? What if they never stop?" He looked at her with a small, almost invisible smile. "Then we stand in the storm together. And if we fall together." Her heart broke and healed in the same moment. For the first time, she realized the depth of what he had given her in that whisper, the words that had started it all. They were not just about pain or resilience. They were about connection. They were about choosing kindness even when the world offered cruelty. Outside the hotel, the crowd grew restless. Chants began to echo through the streets. Lights never stopped flashing. The storm had become more than gossip. It had become a war between truth and noise. And inside, two people sat shoulder to shoulder, holding on to a fragile thread of honesty, praying it would be enough to survive the breaking point. The night of choice, the storm reached its highest point the next evening. The hotel lobby was filled with people shouting questions, holding cameras, and demanding answers. Outside, the streets overflowed with fans, critics, and reporters, all waiting for a glimpse of them. The air was thick with tension, like thunder waiting to break. Sandra stood by the window of her room, staring down at the endless sea of lights. The sound of voices drifted upward, heavy and relentless. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering, "How did we get here?" Behind her, the door opened softly. Keanu stepped inside, his face calm but his eyes heavy. He carried the weight of the world, yet his presence still brought peace to the room. "They won't stop," Sandra said quietly, not turning from the window. "I know," Keanu replied. "They want answers," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They don't want answers," Keanu said gently. "They want a story, and if we don't give them one, they'll invent their own." She turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then maybe we should tell them. Maybe we should end this before it destroys us." Keanu stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Sandra, the truth is not something you hand to a crowd that only wants to tear it apart. The truth is fragile. It lives in the quiet, not in the noise." Her hands shook. "But the noise is swallowing us." He placed his hand gently on hers. "Then tonight we decide. Do we let them take everything, or do we show them that kindness and strength can survive even this storm?" Her breath caught. She realized what he was saying. It wasn't about defending themselves. It wasn't about proving the world wrong. It was about choosing to stand with dignity, even when the world demanded spectacle. Hours passed, and the decision weighed heavier. Finally, near midnight, the hotel manager knocked on their door. "They won't leave," he said nervously. "The crowd is growing restless. If you don't face them, I fear things will get worse." Sandra looked at Keanu, fear in her eyes. "We can't go out there." Keanu's voice was calm but firm. "We can. And we will." The hotel arranged a small platform near the lobby. When the doors opened, the sound hit them like a wave. Flashes blinded them, voices clashed in chaos, and the pressure felt unbearable. But Keanu walked forward slowly, his steps steady. Sandra close beside him. The crowd roared with questions. Some shouted with anger, some with curiosity, some with desperation. It was a storm of sound that seemed impossible to calm. Keanu raised his hand. The noise softened, not fully, but enough. His voice was steady, quiet, but powerful. "I will not tell you everything," he began, "because not everything belongs to the world. Some truths belong to the heart. But I will tell you this. What I said was not scandal. It was not weakness. It was not shame. It was about resilience, about respect, about remembering that even in pain, kindness survives." The words cut through the noise like lightning through a storm. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Flashes slowed. Even the shouts seemed to pause, as if the weight of his words pressed down on every ear. Sandra stood beside him, her eyes wet with tears. For the first time in days, she saw not just Keanu the actor, not just Keanu the public figure, but Keanu the man. Broken, healed, and still standing. But the silence did not last. Questions rose again, louder, harsher, demanding more. And Keanu, after a long pause, shook his head. "That is all," he said simply. He turned, gently guiding Sandra back inside, leaving the storm unsatisfied, leaving the mystery alive. But behind them, the world had changed. For the first time, people had seen not just two celebrities under pressure, but two souls refusing to be broken. In the quiet of the hallway, Sandra leaned against the wall, her breath shaking. "Keanu, you didn't give them what they wanted. You gave them something else." He looked at her with that small, almost invisible smile. Sometimes that's the only way to survive. And though the storm outside still raged, for the first time they both felt that maybe, just maybe, they had turned its power into something greater. The cost of truth. The night after they faced the crowd was strangely quiet. The hotel lobby was calmer, the voices outside softer, but the silence carried a different kind of weight. It was not peace. It was the pause before another storm. Sandra sat on the balcony looking at the city lights below. The noise had not gone away, it had only changed shape. Online, the world argued even harder. Some called Keanu brave. Some called him a coward. Some called him a man hiding secrets too heavy to bear. Lies continued to spread, but mixed among them were voices that spoke of respect, voices that defended his calm and his dignity. She wrapped a blanket around herself, whispering, "How much more can he take?" Keanu joined her a moment later, stepping quietly onto the balcony. He held 2 cups of tea, setting one gently beside her. He sat down, leaning against the railing, his face calm as always. "They won't stop, will they?" Sandra asked, her voice low. Keanu shook his head softly. "Storms never stop when people want to feed on them. But storms also don't last forever." She turned to him, her eyes wet. "You spoke from your heart and still they twist it. Doesn't it make you angry?" His gaze drifted to the horizon. "Anger is easy. Patience is harder. But patience is what keeps us standing." Sandra leaned closer, her voice trembling. "Keanu, I don't know if I'm as strong as you. I don't know if I can carry this much longer." His hand reached for hers, warm and steady. "You don't have to carry it alone." Her chest tightened at his words. For days, she had felt the world pressing down on her, but in that moment she realized he had been carrying more than she could see. Not just the storm outside, but the battles inside himself. Battles no headline would ever understand. Later that evening, their phones buzzed with a new twist. A network announced they had exclusive footage from the night of the whisper. It showed Keanu leaning close, his lips moving, Sandra's face shifting with shock. The footage played in endless loops, slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed by people who claimed to read lips. The theories exploded again. Some swore he confessed to heartbreak. Some swore he revealed regret from his past. Others said it was a declaration of love. The guesses spread like wildfire, and once again the truth was lost. Sandra's heart raced as she watched the endless coverage. "This is too much," she whispered. "They're tearing apart every second of that moment." Keanu watched quietly, then turned off the television. "Let them. We know what it was. That's all that matters." She looked at him, stunned. "How can you be so calm when they're making a circus out of your pain?" His eyes met hers, deep and steady. "Because I have lived through worse storms. And I learned long ago that pain becomes power when you don't let it define you." Her breath caught. She saw in his eyes the memories he never spoke of, the losses, the loneliness, the grief that had shaped his quiet soul. And suddenly, she understood why his whisper had carried so much weight. It had not just been words. It had been his truth, given in the only way he knew how, quiet, humble, and real. The next day, they walked together through the hotel's private corridor. A small group of fans had gathered by the back entrance, holding signs that said, "We believe you, stay strong, and truth matters." For the first time, Sandra saw tears in Keanu's eyes. He stopped, placed his hand against the glass door, and whispered, "They see it. Even if the rest never does." Her heart ached at the sight. For days she had feared the storm would break him. But here he was, standing taller in silence than most could stand in speech. That night, as they sat side by side once more, Sandra leaned close to him, her voice fragile but strong. "Keanu, whatever happens next, I want you to know, your truth changed me. Your words changed me." Keanu turned, his eyes soft with quiet gratitude. "Then maybe that's why I said them." The storm outside still raged, but between them there was peace. And yet, deep inside, both of them knew the cost of truth was not over. The world would demand more, and the final test had not yet come. The final truth. The storm did not fade easily. The world still demanded answers, still twisted stories, still tried to take something fragile and turn it into spectacle. But Sandra and Keanu stood together, holding on to the only thing that could not be taken away, the truth between them. The night of the final event arrived. It was a charity gala, one they had agreed to attend long before the whisper that changed everything. Walking in together felt like walking into the eye of the storm. The hall glittered with lights, cameras, flashed without mercy, and the crowd was restless with curiosity. Everyone waited for them to break, for them to confess, for them to give the world what it wanted. Sandra's hand trembled as she walked beside him. Keanu felt it and gently covered her hand with his. No words were needed. The gesture was enough. When they stepped onto the stage, the noise was overwhelming. Whispers, shouts, flashes, questions. Everything collided in a roar. Sandra froze, her breath caught in her chest. But Keanu stepped forward, his presence calm, his voice steady. "For weeks," he began softly, "the world has demanded to know what I whispered that night. For weeks, lies have spread, and the truth has been buried under noise. But tonight, I will tell you this. My words were not meant for the world. They were meant for one person. But since you have all made it your storm, let me share what matters most." The room fell silent. Even the flashes slowed. Every eye was on him. He turned slightly toward Sandra, his expression gentle, his voice softer now yet still strong enough to carry. "I told her that pain does not have to break us, that even in the darkest moments, kindness is what saves us. I told her that she is not alone, and I told her that I believe, no matter what the world says, there is strength in staying true to who we are." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of his honesty. The hall remained silent, stunned. Many had expected scandal, confession, or weakness. What they heard instead was something simple, something real. But even in silence, not everyone would understand. Some would still twist his words, some would still demand more. Yet in that moment, Sandra realized something powerful. The truth was never for them. It was for her. It was for him. It was for anyone who had ever been broken and still chose kindness. She stepped closer, taking his hand in hers. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed, but she didn't let go. She whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "Your truth saved me, Keanu, and it will save more than you know." He smiled faintly, the quiet smile that carried more strength than any speech. After the event, when they left the stage, the world erupted again. Articles, debates, arguments. But this time, something new spread among the noise. People shared his words, not twisted, not broken, but remembered exactly as he spoke them. Kindness saves us. We are not alone. Staying true is strength. In the days that followed, the storm began to change. The loudest voices still argued, but softer voices rose above them. Voices of people inspired. voices of people who had felt pain and found hope in his words. The storm was not gone, but it was no longer theirs to carry alone. In the quiet of the hotel, away from lights and cameras, Sandra and Keanu sat together. The night was calm, the city outside glowing gently. She leaned close, resting her head against his shoulder. "You know," she whispered, "nobody believed you would ever share your truth. But you did, and it changed everything." Keanu's eyes softened, his voice a whisper. Sometimes the hardest thing to say is the one thing the world needs most. And for the first time since the whisper that started it all, Sandra felt peace. Not because the storm was over, but because she knew they had survived it together. The truth had cost them, but it had also freed them. And in the end, it was not the storm that defined them. It was the quiet strength of one whisper, the resilience of two souls, and the power of kindness that refused to break.